What about all the people, just right on that topic, I didn't know you were going to bring that up, but a lot of people who have a problem with 9/11 and comment on YouTube a lot and say the CIA did that and stuff like that, they often point to the CIA funding the Mujahideen as like, oh, see, they were funding them and then they made them their own soldiers throughout the 90s and then they came here and knocked down the buildings. Like, how do you understand that? To me, that always seemed like this is what the CIA does. Yeah. They go and they get intelligence assets who are going to help them in whatever the big problem of the time is. And the big problem at the time was, you had Russia. You had the Soviet Union still in existence. And it's not like they knew, like, oh, Osama bin Laden is going to be Osama bin Laden. But a lot of people out there who are going to have theories about it are going to say, of course they did.
Yeah, yeah. So the problem with funding and arming the rebels was not that they were going to someday come against the West. It was the fact that we, after we achieved our objective, after we pushed the Russians out of Afghanistan, then we pretty much forgot about the place. Then we left Afghanistan to become the big smoldering crater that it eventually became, just a collection of warlords, and then the Taliban comes in, and it's just a awful, horrible place that has lots of armed factions, some of them carrying weapons that we gave them back in the 80s. So it's not the fact that we're arming them, but it's the fact that we often don't have the long vision of where these conflicts are going to go. So the CIA was extremely successful in Afghanistan because our big adversary was the Russians, and we did manage to help kick them out. And it was one of the great accomplishments of the Cold War, but it turns out it had other kinds of consequences that we didn't even imagine back in the 80s when this was happening.
Yeah, when you look at content made about the 90s, especially with the CIA, and you talk about those early deaths, what was it? What was the name of the bin Laden desk again? I'm blanking.
Oh, it's Alec Station.
Alec Station, right. That's it. It's like they were like the small little desk over there, like doing this cute little thing kind of, and it became the central story because I think whenever you have some sort of power vacuum, and especially if you're the one that left it behind in some ways, you don't really hear that sucking sound until it's too late. If I look at world history, that just seems to be a common pattern. This doesn't seem any different.
Yeah, nobody took bin Laden seriously up until even after the bombings in Kenya. It's in I guess that was 98. They were just seen as just Bush League, not very important, certainly not a threat to us. And this little Alec Station, this small unit within the CIA that was focused on bin Laden, was getting no resources. Nobody was paying attention to them until at the very end, when things started to get really, it's when the red lights, as George Tenet would say, started to flash that something was about to happen. We didn't really care about bin Laden or Al Qaeda at all.
Yeah, and the timing of also you had a new administration in there, which is brutal because then you got to reconvince a bunch of people. It's the timing of everything was wild. But what year again did you become the CIA reporter at the Post?
It was 2007. So This is right after the revelations about black site prisons, and so it was a pretty murky time for the agency.
Probably get there today.
Okay.
But before that, what was your role at the Post?
So I had been an investigative reporter at the Post. I was brought in to essentially do environmental investigations because I'd done that. That's
just like
where
you were talking
I won
about.
the prize, and so the Post hired me to do that. And then 9/11 happened, and this is one of those moments when everything in a news organization changes. We had our national security reporters, but suddenly everybody had to be a national security specialist. Because of my environmental work, I'd done some work on nuclear radiation, on weapons, weapon stockpiles. It just happened to be part of what I looked at. And so my bosses said, oh, you know about nuclear stuff. Why don't you write about Al-Qaeda and dirty bombs? So I went off to figure out, is Al-Qaeda going to be able to blow up a dirty bomb someplace? And that became essentially a proliferation beat. So for the next 4 years, I ended up essentially traveling the world trying to figure out what were the WMD threats. What were the things that were going to, the possibilities that Al-Qaeda could get a dirty bomb or a biological weapon or a chemical weapon. Or
in like 02, 03, 04, you're saying?
Yeah, that was it. And right in the middle of this comes the big question of, well, what about Iraq? Does it have a WMD program? And I was still new enough at the job that I was of kind of a lot of self-doubt. I mean, am I really going to be able to answer this question? This is a question that lots of reporters are trying to get at. And my colleagues at the New York Times, some of them were sort of singing the same chorus as the administration at the time, saying, yes, Saddam Hussein has this nuclear program and we're going to, we're going to wake up to a mushroom cloud someday because they're off to the races to build all these weapons.
Like Judy Miller.
Exactly. Yeah. And I understand how these stories get started sometimes, but I was kind of beginning with a blank slate and just trying to figure out this story myself. The more I kept poking into it and talking to real experts, the bigger the doubts became about whether there was really a significant weapons program there at all. And the bits of evidence that the administration would put out saying Iraq had purchased aluminum tubes or this and that, and it was evidence of a secret nuclear program. When we really got to the details, none of them worked out. None of them panned out. We talked to Iraqi defectors who were said to know where chemical weapons facilities were and where Saddam Hussein was building nuclear bombs, and we got Google Earth maps and just satellite imagery and tried to piece these things together. Every single one of them would just evaporate the closer you looked at it. And so our stories became very skeptical. We said, well, there's claims about a WMD program, but there's no real evidence. And yet, even after the invasion started, my bosses were so convinced that they were going to be found, they were ordering me to go and, to be on hand to whenever these big stockpiles were discovered so I could write about them. And of course, years passed and nothing was ever found.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.